The worst combination is when the athlete sees the strength and conditioning coach and they take them through a workout. And then the next day they go to their PT and they take them through a different workout. 10 times out of 10, Erica, that does not work. If I find out the physio is also doing the exercise, I just say choose. I won't be upset if you don't choose me, like you choose, but it's only one cook in the kitchen. Otherwise, we make a big mess and the poor athlete is so confused. Be aware too of the cook that can cook everything.
Oh, we do it
Yeah.
all here. We do it all.
Yeah. No, you can't
You
do it
can't.
well.
How diligently plyometrics must be coached because the plyometrics is the biggest miss I see in not just rehab programs, but you
Do
and
you
I have
say
discussed
miss
this.
or mess?
Mess
Miss.
too.
Miss.
Yeah.
Plyometrics, as you know, Erica, are like speed development, extremely technical. I have never met a PT that can coach plyometrics.
Carmen, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Erica. Great to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you. I think the last time you were on, we were talking about what is causing all of these pediatric ACL injuries. And I think that episode has
Yeah.
a couple thousand views, and I'm glad it got so much exposure and so much reception because people need to know what the real problem is. And I know in that episode, we discussed the menstrual cycle misinformation and people blaming that and female physiology. But you came on and you said it is the lack of physical and athletic development and really getting strong and having a quality S&C program. So that was our last episode, guys. I'll leave the link in the caption below. So, Carmen, welcome back.
Thanks so much.
So today we're going to talk about the difference between a physical therapist slash physio and a strength and conditioning professional, what
Okay.
their roles are in the rehab space, specifically ACL rehab. But would you say for any injury that requires surgery or early stage work, this can apply to?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can have this conversation about anything that's post-operative.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, because I think a lot of people are unclear on how long to see their physical therapist when they're injured, and then when should you or should you at all transition to a strength coach? And the answer is yes. But I would love for you to just really break it down for us what the scope is for everyone here in this injury process.
This episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. I don't know about you guys, but I am very overwhelmed with the current crazy youth sports schedules. Between all these practices and 2 weekend games and tournaments, it can be really hard to recover fast. This is why I love Simply Faster's Firefly recovery device for busy youth athletes. It's portable, super easy to use, and it stimulates blood flow to the muscles for faster recovery and reduced soreness. You can wear it in the car on the way to practices, in between tournament games, or when you get home after that long weekend of games. The Firefly is a great added boost to your everyday recovery of sleep and proper nutrition. Click the link in the caption below to get the Firefly and start your recovery routine today.
It's confusing for parents out there, that have, their kid having just had a surgery. Maybe they're 15 years old and they're not sure, who's going to be leading that particular intervention of rehab. And I think that's the first point that I'll make is that we do need leads in development with athletes, especially on the rehab space. And that lead person can shift throughout the process. So typically, the early stages of rehab, which is immediately post op, is the physical therapist. Okay. And in Canada, we call them physiotherapists, but it's the same designation and they have very similar scope of practice. It can shift based on the state or the province that the practitioner is working in, but they all are regulated professionals that write a board exam after their professional degree. The challenge is that physical therapists and physios tend to not have a specialization, right? They graduate and they have the skill set to be able to help in rehab people that are young, people that are old, people with chronic pain, people with an acute trauma, athletes, non-athletes, and what have you. So the first thing I usually suggest to parents is when you're putting this team together, find a PT that does specialize working more with an athlete population, because right away that's a different type of therapist. And then ask them, do they have somebody that they also use that handles the strength and conditioning? So that can be a bit of a hint or a red flag. If they say, well, no, I don't have anyone, or I don't refer out to anyone, then
Or
it
I can
might,
do it.
or I can do it. Yeah, then what we might be looking at is a lack of comprehensiveness in the entire return to play process. Because if we use ACL as an example, that's at least 12 months. In pediatric cases, a lot of times it's longer. And the reason why it's longer is you have two problems on your hands. The first problem is you have a knee that just got operated on. The second problem we have is a very low training age. So it's not like I'm rehabbing a professional athlete with 10, 15 years of training age behind their belt. And they know how to squat, they know how to deadlift, they've got a certain amount of muscle mass on their body already going into the operation. We're dealing with usually kind of the opposite of that. Another thing you want to look at as a parent or a sport coach that's sort of trying to tag along with these professionals is a pediatric specialty. So somebody that does understand adolescence, understands growth and motor development, because that is sort of part of the puzzle. And now your question is around, scope. Like, what is it that they do and what should they be doing? There are physiotherapists or physical therapists that may have strength and conditioning coach like certification, like a designation, but being certified means that you wrote an exam. And it was a multiple choice exam typically, and nobody necessarily evaluated you practically on your ability to coach. So we could have a whole different podcast, Erica, on certifications, but we won't. Just know that certifications do not deem someone competent in the ability to coach exercise, especially exercise that occurs that is very dynamic and very fast. Okay, so sprinting, changing directions, plyometrics, high velocity shooting in any sport is all very dynamic, very fast movement, and requires somebody with a coaching eye to be able to break down those performances and make sure that they're done correctly. And those are done obviously at the very end of rehab. So let's back up. Athlete just had surgery. They need to go see their PT. Absolutely. Because the PT's job is going to be get the swelling down, get that range of motion reestablished, which goes part and parcel with swelling, right? The joint swells, so we don't move the joint. The joint is quite smart, right? So the PT is going to play that game of managing the swelling and managing that return of range of motion. And if we're talking about the knee, that's a certain amount of extension and a certain amount of flexion, and that can be measured and quantified. There's also a test called a leg test, which is just basically lifting the leg up and down off a table. They have a certain number of reps an athlete needs to be able to do. So those are the sort of first three milestones in early stage ACL rehab that a PT would handle. Okay. The PT scope of practice is massive. And I know this because I teach this stuff in the courses I teach at the universities. The students understand different scopes. And when I say it is massive, it really is. They can do pretty much anything in terms of rehab. They are allowed to do early stage. They're allowed to do mid stage. They are allowed to do late stage, which is more the strength and conditioning stuff. But being allowed to do something doesn't mean that you should do something, right? It really should depend on the person's awareness of their abilities and their knowledge and their, I guess, return to sport acumen, if you will. So typically after the first stage of rehab is finished by the physical therapist and the athlete has a gait that is normalized, they can walk and put load onto that operative limb, they can squat properly, and that should be measured with some type of AI to make sure that the squat is even, because if it's not, they might need more PT intervention. But usually once the athlete can achieve those milestones, they can go and see a strength and conditioning specialist. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that the PT is completely subbed off and they're no longer involved, their job and role will be to continue to keep the knee happy. That's sort of what the language I like to use. They might start to do some soft tissue release in other areas to make sure that joints are moving freely. I call it getting unstuck. I love the PTs that I work with because they do such a fantastic job with their manual skills. Those are not the skills of a strength and conditioning specialist. Now, a strength and conditioning specialist is really there to recondition the athlete. So I almost don't like to use the word rehab. I like to prefer to use the term reconditioning. So this is where we are tasked to now put some strength and function or higher level function back on that individual. And usually we start with strength training, and then we move from getting to a certain level of strength into more high velocity dynamic movements like plyometrics, like sprinting, and we bridge the gap along the way. And we also change our environments. We might be in a weight room for the first little while with the reconditioning process, and then we segue into the athlete's daily training environment. So if it's a soccer athlete, that would be out on the field, out on the turf, get the cleats on and start moving in a way that will eventually look like high velocity, unpredictable maneuvers at the very, very last stage of the rehabilitation piece. So I guess that's where I'll start. Not sure if you have any more questions about what I just sort of outlined.
I think my thing is, when should the athlete transition to the strength coach? Even if the PT has done that stage before, why might it be better to be with someone who is in strength and conditioning and who's done it for many years?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I always just think about specialties in terms of what a person does all day long, right? Like imagine if you're a hairstylist and you just do highlights. That's your MO, right? People come to you because you do highlights and you do highlights all day, every day, and you're very good at that. Well, a strength and conditioning coach that works with multi-directional team sport athletes or even racket sport athletes that have to move in many unpredictable ways tends to be a specialist in that area, right? We're not necessarily seeing people that that are in their 60s with frozen shoulder. We're not necessarily seeing people that want to lose weight and get healthy, right? We want to start thinking about the population that we see, and that population is a bit nichey. And so when you are more nichey and more specialized and you're spending more time in that area, well, that would be a great pathway into excellence at your practice, right? You'd probably be more skilled and better at that practice than somebody that dabbles in it, right? And so my advice to parents is find somebody that's not dabbling in it, that's not spending 5 or 10% of their week doing return to play with high level athletes. Find the person that does this all day, every day as their specialty. But of course, make sure that that person also has their training, their university degree, make sure that they have their insurance and that they're credentialed and all of those things. Um, but the role clarity becomes absolutely critical at that time because it can be very, very confusing for a young person, for a young athlete to be getting messages from a PT about strength training and maybe even about plyometrics, and then getting different messages from a strength and conditioning coach. It never really works out well when those messages are different. And the person that suffers is the athlete, especially if they're an adolescent. Then they wonder who they can trust. So, one thing that I've done in my practice is I've aligned with physiotherapists that are really happy with their role and really good at their role. And so they also understand exactly what I do. So your allies as a strength and conditioning coach are PTs that know what you know, but don't do what you do. Know what you know, but they don't do what you do, right? They have a really good understanding and they can help educate the parents as well. The most dangerous combination is really when the PT is still doing strength and conditioning type work with an athlete 6, 7, 8 months post-op, and there's no load. there's a complete violation of the principle of progressive overload. And unfortunately, in my own practice, I've had to get quite strict with people when they come on board to see me for ACL rehab. It's who's the physio. I want to talk to them. I want to talk about role clarity. I want to make sure that I'm doing this and they're doing that and they're okay with it. And it's not about me being, a tyrant or a know-it-all. It's about role clarity and professionalism. So the athlete gets the best care possible. Ultimately at the end of the day, Erica, like as a strength and conditioning coach, I know that I can't medically clear an athlete. That's the physician's job, right? I know that, but what I know I can do is I can add to the pile of data and say, this athlete's force plate data said this, their cutting movement assessment screen data says this, their beat test, because I want to test their conditioning. I am a strength and conditioning coach. I want to make sure they're fit enough to return to their sport. Their beep test or yo-yo test or their 30-15, whatever test I decide to use, there's some more data. I might run some, psychological evaluations that are available to make sure that their body can be true. They feel that they can trust their body, and that all adds to this team approach. I've pooled all of that data with athletes in the past, but worked very closely with the PT that said, okay, I like all of that, but their right ankle is still really stuck. I'm like, okay, I wouldn't know that. I'm not in there with my hands on their right ankle doing mobilizations of the joint. That's outside of my scope of practice. But that is incredibly valuable information, because we do know that if an ankle isn't flexing to its full potential, that puts the knee at risk for future injury. And so we don't really know exactly what the number one risk factor is for, a re-injury, but what we do know is that the better the communication, it equals a better outcome. And if people do their jobs respectively, it also leads to a better outcome, especially if everybody's collaborating and communicating. So that would be sort of my take on things. And in Canada, we have a designation called a kinesiologist, which is something that isn't necessarily used in the United States, but it's really like a person that is trained to do active rehabilitation. So we use exercise as our number one modality to rehabilitate an injury, whereas a physiotherapist might use passive modalities like ultrasound or a TENS machine or blood flow restriction. Well, that's somewhat active. That could go in either category. Or shockwave therapy. Yep. Or manual therapy. Those are all passive modalities of rehab. So a kinesiologist and a strength and conditioning coach is going to use the active modalities. And if you put all that together, then you have a perfect storm. You have a really, really high level rehabilitation and reconditioning program.
Yeah, it really just comes down to everyone knowing their roles, putting the egos away, and just putting the athlete first. I think, when we have that collaboration, the kid will go back healthy and their risk of re-injury is much lower. And I do want to talk about the medical clearance you brought up, because oftentimes in ACL rehab, they'll get to a certain month mark, whether it's 8, 9, 10 months. They go to the surgeon, they look at the graft, and they're like, you're good to go. You're medically cleared. And then oftentimes people will be like, well, we did all of our PT up to this point. We did a few hops and plyos in the clinic and our strengthening, even though they weren't really loaded as heavy as they could have been. And then they just skip the return to sport phase altogether. And I really want you to talk about that return to sport phase with the strength and conditioning coach. What is really being covered? What are the strength standards? How diligently plyometrics must be coached? Because the plyometrics is the biggest miss I see in not just rehab programs, but you and I have discussed this.
Or mess?
Mess too. Yeah.
Mess too.
It's complete chaos. What goes on in that return to sport phase, and what are the standards, and just how meticulous it has to be in those last few months before you hit the field again?
Okay, let's start with medically cleared as a defining term. Medically cleared does not mean functionally cleared. Okay. It means that the healing has taken place. So healing, tissue healing is based on a timeline. Let's start with that. Tissue healing is based on a timeline. Functional healing and functional restoration or restoring function to the level to return to sport is not based on a timeline because it's a neurological adaptation as well as a morphological adaptation. So neural meaning motor skills, just like sports skills. So for coaches listening, if you want to work on a particular sports skill and it takes time and practice and attention to proper techniques, the same thing with plyometrics. Okay, so plyometrics is like in this category of a neural adaptation as well as a morphological adaptation. Now, the morphological piece are things like tissue remodeling, so building muscle. And that's not something that's done in days and weeks. This is months, right? Building stiffness in tissue or in joints to handle impact, like the ankle joint itself needs to become stiffer. And I'm not talking it doesn't move well. I'm talking when the foot interacts with the ground, it doesn't deform when it hits the ground. The foot literally acts like a hammer striking the ground, and that helps with, speed and power execution. So the medically cleared does not equal functionally cleared. So when a medical professional like a surgeon tells my athlete that they are medically cleared to play or to run, I nod and smile and say, okay, great. Let's do the functional testing. Let's see where you are in terms of function. And then I produce a report that states either yes, maybe the person is functionally cleared, or no, most of the time, especially if it's early in the rehab, like 6 months, 7 months, they're not functionally cleared. So when we think about the rehab timeline, rather than thinking about them in months, we want to think about them in steps or stages. And so we've got the early stage where the person restores basic body weight movements. Then from the basic body weight movements, they start to add load to their body in a controlled, predictable manner done in the weight room. So that's strength training. They're going to strength train. Now from roughly 12 to 16 months, weeks, 12 to 16 weeks post-op, pretty serious strength training. And we're not talking band exercises and pink dumbbells that weigh 5 pounds and body weight everything. No, especially for the lower body. A body weight squat is not a stress for the lower body. A body weight split squat is not a stress for the lower body. We walk around all day and that's the same stress. So from that 12-weekish time upwards to 6, 7 months, the athlete is furiously strength training, building muscle as well. So we need volume, right? And the one blessing in disguise, Erica, in all of this hot mess in pediatrics is that I actually get time as a strength and conditioning coach to develop young girls, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, and make them real strong. Yeah. I'm talking by the end of their strength intervention, and trust me, we're going to strength train forever, but by the end of like the main meat and potatoes of strength training, they're squatting their body weight, they're deadlifting their body weight, yep. They're cleaning 50 to 60% of their body weight, they're hitting 20 to 30 perfect push-ups, they're able to do pull-ups. And so as you're noticing as well, hey, that doesn't sound like a knee rehab program. No, this is a strength and conditioning program. This is a program that's going to target their entire body. They can hold a side plank for 2 minutes. We can do neck bridges. So we're targeting everything. They can do a seated calf raise with their body weight, have a partner sit on their lap and do a bilateral seated calf raise with their partner sitting on their knee that weighs 130 pounds. So we have targets and milestones that we hit, and then we start to transition into our return to impact. All right. So with impact, we're now talking 2 to 3 times body weight and forces. So things like jogging is actually higher force on the body than that body weight body squat they just did. And then you multiply that by like 300 foot contacts in a 10-minute jog, And it's like, holy mackerel, that's a lot of load. And so with the return to running, we do a full program of run, walk, and lots of track and field exercises like marches and dribbles to
I
build our
just had a
capacity.
girl who finished the run program, your run
Oh,
program,
awesome.
and she's more of a like a runner. Like she loves the endurance stuff, so she loved the run program. But then my other girls were like, "This is the worst part of rehab," but they do it, and it really
And
prepares
yeah,
them. It really gets
yeah,
them
it does.
ready.
It just has to
Yeah,
be done in a progressive manner. And
yeah.
not going from doing nothing and just waiting, because this is the old way. The old way, Erica, was I'm just going to wait till 7 months and then I'm going to start running.
And
And
it's
there was
random.
no
It's
bridge,
yeah.
right? Like if I get my hands on an athlete in early stage rehab and the doc clears them medically to go in the pool, they're in the swimming pool doing water running with me. So this would be like a really high level athlete that's just dying to recondition and get back as quickly as possible. It doesn't always speed up the process. I do want to be strict and say that, but it certainly makes the process smooth because their conditioning is phenomenal.
The kettlebell swings as well are so great.
Yep. So we do kettlebell swing workouts. We do retrograde workouts where athletes are running backwards up hills on treadmills. There are lots of ways to condition athletes. But again, what's the physiotherapist going to do? They're going to put them on the exercise bike. Why? Because that's what they've always done. I couldn't imagine being a jack of all trades, like having to know a rehab for every joint in the body and every element. That's a lot to know. And I tip my hat to the people that are doing a great job of that. And I think like the team that we use here works because I think the physio is happy, like, oh, thank goodness, I have someone I can trust. I can send this person to see Carmen and her team, and they're going to get this kid back, and it's going to be sensible and it's going to be scientific and evidence informed, right? And then after we bridge this gap between the heavy strength work and then the return to impact, that's when the more serious plyometrics come in. And plyometrics never leave the program, ever. And plyometrics, as you know, Erica, are like speed development, extremely technical. I have never met a PT that can coach plyometrics.
Me either.
Except that's actually not true. There's one person in California that I know of that works with Matt McInnes Watson in the States. He was a track athlete growing up, and he can coach plyometrics. Now, does it mean that physiotherapists cannot learn to coach plyometrics? Absolutely, they can. So it depends, right? We have a physio here who has done some workshops with me. So he comes to all my workshops and learns plyometrics, and he's an athlete. So he goes and he trains himself and he practices these things.
Mm.
So, in my opinion, yes, he's competent to be doing later stages of rehab as a physiotherapist. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because he has that skill set and he's competent at coaching that skill set. And do you need to be able to do the skill set to coach it? Yes, to some degree of proficiency, because athletes as a population tend to learn very well by watching, right? They're mimics. So they'll watch the coach do the drill, explain the drill, and then they'll copy and they'll do the drill, right? And that's good coaching. So I think that plyometrics, because they are so unbelievably technical, from what you're looking at and then the speed at which they're done, your eye needs to be able to pick up all of these details. Plus, you need space. Like, there's not very many PT clinics that have wide open space to teach plyometrics.
And a lot of them
So,
have hard ground and not grass or turf. And
right.
yeah, and I see that a lot. Girls like doing single leg broads on like hard clinic floor. Not ideal.
Not a good
Can you
idea.
explain why
No.
that it's more ideal to do plyometrics on soft ground and sneakers first?
Sure. And that the key there is first. Okay,
Mhm.
because what we're doing is we're introducing and exposing the knee to impact. So again, rather than going from no impact, just strength training, to hard surfaces like cement or a hard clinic floor, especially on one leg when you're absorbing everything on one versus sharing on two,
Or
it's
cleats.
just too big of a jump in mechanical load. Okay, so everything can be measured through physics and biomechanics on how much mechanical load is on the joint. So it's just too big of a jump, and then you may get a setback. So my recommendation is usually go to the turf, get your shoes on, and do these tier 1 level drills and do this much volume, roughly. The volume can be adjusted based on the person. And then over time, we might graduate to higher tiered drills, tier meaning intensity, because plyometrics are intensified by going from 2 legs to 1 leg, from a leap to a bound to a hop. Hopping is the most intense, but also to the ability of the athlete. So as athletes actually get more proficient at plyometrics, by nature, they become more intense. It's just like speed, right? As athletes get faster, or faster athletes will actually have more stress on their bodies than slower athletes when they do the same type of drilling. And these are conversations that strength and conditioning specialists have. These aren't conversations I have with physiotherapists, right? This is a completely different domain of knowledge than most PTs would have.
Yeah. Now, when you say that you don't really know a physical therapist who can coach plyometrics properly, I mean, what are some of the cues and things that they're missing? I can say what I see on social media, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Honestly, Erica, I haven't more. It is not because I've witnessed a lot of this like in person. It's because what has happened is athletes have come to me late in the rehab piece, when parents have recognized that maybe their son or daughter is behind, and then I ask that athlete to show me what they have done. Okay, show me the drills that you've done, and I know quite quickly that they haven't been coached or corrected by a professional. So and then I ask, who taught you this? Who showed you this? Have you ever been told this? Have you ever been coached in this manner? And the answer unequivocally, or 10 times out of 10, is no. They haven't had that exposure. And, it is what it is. So that would be my perspective. Of course, yes, on social media, I guess what I see on social media is a lot of people jumping on force plates, looking at the ground, or jumping incorrectly. So if we're going to test a motor skill like jumping on force plates, we better damn well make sure they can jump. Okay, so if I am going to test somebody's ability to do at the 6-lap run, the Cooper test, right? The dreaded Cooper test, they better be able to run, because the test itself becomes invalid if the person lacks the skill to perform the test.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of acceptance in the social media world nowadays of what I would consider incompetency, right? Or people will just move on and ignore it. It's actually quite shocking to me that somebody would be that incompetent and then take the next step and actually advertise it.
I never understood the amount of force plates I saw on social media, and I'm like, "This kid can't even land and jump properly."
Yeah, it seems to be. I think people are using it as a marketing tool now,
Yeah.
right? We have this technology, therefore we are the most superior place to train. But we have to remind ourselves that we are teaching motor skills. We are retraining and reconditioning motor skills. No force plate can coach, right? Our focus is not in the right place. It shouldn't be on testing. Our focus should be on good rehab and what that looks like, and good reconditioning and what that looks like. And what it looks like is people that can teach.
Another thing that is not really being touched on in the return to sport phase is just being taught positions of deceleration and side shuffling and cutting.
Okay.
Oftentimes it seems very random in return to sport, where, you know, they're maybe having the kid do a 90-degree cut before we start with a 45-degree cut, work our way up to those harder changes of directions with the more load on the knee. So it seems like very random, and there's no like process where like one precedes another before we move on.
Yeah, well, my comment on that would be if something is random, so what you're observing is certainly random, and it just tells me that they don't know what they're doing, right? So if you hired a plumber that didn't know what they were doing and removed, I don't know, a pipe and replaced it with a different pipe, and then a veteran plumber came in and watched them and observed them and peer evaluated them and said, well, you did everything in the wrong order. No wonder you didn't fix the sink.
Yeah.
Well, it's no different when it comes to reconditioning or teaching the difference between a 45-degree step cut and a 180-degree pivot cut. Like I train athletes for the CFL Combine every year at this time of year. I work with the top football players in the province to help them get faster at some of the tests. Okay. It's not my favorite type of work because I obviously don't really think that someone that does well on tests necessarily is going to be effective as the football player in the league. But these are the tests that they have to do. So we might as well help them get really fast at the test. And one of the reasons why some people are faster than other people is they're more efficient in how they move. Well, they're more efficient in how they move because of their foot interaction with the ground, because of the timing at which they lower their hips, because of the reacceleration phase and how they use their arms, where they position their eyes, the angle of their acceleration shin. I could go on and on about this. This is the domain of the strength and conditioning specialist. This is the type of work that we do. We are actually more similar, Erica, in my opinion, to a sport coach, to a skills coach. I would much rather spend money buying tickets to a championship game and watch than go to a rehab workshop or a rehab course. Like most of us that are in strength and conditioning are sports fanatics. We love sport. We love working with athletes. We love competition, right? We love all of those things. And that's why kids usually like to work with us because they know we understand their world. And when we have like really technical kids, so I have a kid I'm working with now, and he plays lacrosse. And I didn't play lacrosse. And he said to me, he goes, it's actually kind of crazy how much you know about shooting. And I said, okay, why is that? And he's like, I don't know. Like, you've never played lacrosse. You know so much about shooting. And I said, I understand physics. I could break down a rotational movement pattern in about 5 minutes and tell you where all your deficits would be. Last night, my son and I were in the garage gym goofing around, and he's working on his tackling. And he had hurt himself at practice last week, and he said he did a bad tackle. He's like, Mom, I didn't tackle correctly and was in a bad position, and I tweaked my back. So we had to let the back heal a little bit. He's doing this tackling drill that I made up. So Erica also did not play rugby. I did not tackle people, but I worked with the Canadian women's wrestling team for 5 years, trained 5 world medalists, and then I worked with the Americans for a few years. And I've watched a lot of wrestling practices, and I've watched a ton of wrestling matches. So I have a pretty good idea of what the body position should be, right? And so I altered his body position on his tackling last night as his mom coach, and he's like, my back spine I don't feel anything. And so, okay, why would that be, right? Well, because part of the scope, again, in strength and conditioning is to be a performance analyst, right? To understand the mechanics or the kinematics of movement and to go, okay, this movement isn't as efficient as it could be. Plus, the way that the movement's being done could potentially lead to an overuse injury. And so most people that did strength and conditioning did an undergraduate degree in kinesiology or human kinetics or health science, like any movement science, right? To become a physiotherapist, at least in Canada, you could do a psychology degree, you could do a biology degree, you could do a sociology degree, like an arts degree, and then go on to professional school. So you would have zero performance analysis, zero motor behavior and biomechanics in your undergrad. Now, I'm not saying all PTs don't have this. Some do. The ones that work with my company all have kinesiology undergraduate degrees. So you can imagine how good they are. But they also work with a myriad of different types of athletes. So they tend to be very general in what they do, right? And very good at the early stages of rehab and very good with their hands, and then sort of farm out the S&C to me and my team. But it's not the same everywhere, right? And I think the main thing for the listeners and for parents is you really got to interview people. You've really got to ask them, do you have, the name and number of someone you've worked with that I could talk to? Like, it's a reference check.
And when you see them for the first time, if they're doing an assessment, watch.
Yep.
I used to be against that, Carmen, but I think it's good that they see what goes on and the level that we're doing at it the first time you meet me. Like I don't really
I do.
I really don't want you just dropping my girl off and you just like hope for the best that's going on in the gym. Like I prefer they watch so that they can see the difference between, what we do and maybe what they didn't get in the past with, coaching and correcting and really nailing down form. So,
and I think that goes the same even if the athletes had seen a different strength and conditioning coach, because it's an unregulated profession. But please know, like the listeners, that even if a profession is regulated, you can't assume people can govern themselves. You can't assume people are competent. You can't assume that people are not lazy and that they care, right? So you should go as a parent, and you should watch, and you should ask questions. And when I have parents watch me, I explain everything that I'm doing. I said, okay, now we're going to look at this, and this is why. And that's what helps, earn the trust of that family. And like you say, it helps them understand just the differences in how we practice and how a PT will practice. Like PTs have excellent assessment skills. And some of them are very, very good, have very good manual skills too. At least the ones here that I use, I call them magic hands. They open up windows for me. I'm like, thank you so much for giving that hip space, because now when I squat this person, well, I'm not physically squatting them, just to be clear, right? They're squatting and I'm watching them. They're doing it well because the hip is now moving better. The hip is unstuck. So what a perfect team, right? And oftentimes we set it up where the reconditioning client will see the PT for an hour in our gym space and then come into they'll be in the clinic side, and then they'll come to the gym space and see us afterwards right away. So that way the window is open, the new freedom of movement is there, and then I'm to put some strength and good quality movement on top of that. And that is literally the best combination that we could have. The worst combination is when the athlete sees the strength and conditioning coach and they take them through a workout, and then the next day they go to their PT and they take them through a different workout. 10 times out of 10, Erica, that does not work. 10 times out of 10. And I personally, because I've been doing this for so long, I do not do that. If I find out that the physio is also doing the exercise, I just say choose. Just choose. I won't be upset if you don't choose me. Like, you choose, but it's only one cook in the kitchen. Otherwise, we make a big mess, and the poor athlete is so confused. It never ends well.
Yeah, you cannot have two cooks in the kitchen. You have to just pick a path.
Be aware too of the cook that can cook everything.
That is a problem too. Oh, we do it all here. We do it all.
Yeah, no, you can't do it well.
You can't.
You could do it all, but not well. It's like going to school and taking 12 different subjects at once. You're probably going to get straight C's, right? But if you took 3 courses at a time and you really kind of stayed dedicated to that, you're going to be more successful. Be the same if an athlete tried to play 12 different sports at once. Never works out, right? So I think it's really important that parents do vet the clinic and the clinician, and also don't rely on what people say. what people say and what people do can sometimes have variance. And we want to judge people by their ability to demonstrate their competence. So as a university level instructor, we do evaluations. Like the students do evaluations of us, but they only evaluate their experience. They cannot evaluate us on our ability to teach or our knowledge of subject matter, our competency. Our competency is evaluated by other instructors, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? Because the other instructors can say, you talk too much, you lean on the podium, stop chewing gum, make sure that there's more breaks, your slides have too much writing on them, like whatever they deem as sound pedagogy, which is the science of teaching, they will share, like a more senior instructor. It's the same thing should be happening in both strength and conditioning and in PT. Who is mentoring young PTs? Hopefully it's not TikTok.
Oh gosh. Hopefully not.
Or AI. So I personally, in my older age, take on 2 to 3 young strength and conditioning coaches a year now, and I mentor them like crazy. They come in, they watch me coach. Sometimes I pay them for a session that I'm coaching, just so they can learn and learn how to coach, right? Learn progressions, because I've learned from other people in the same way. Like when I did my kettlebell training, Erica, we had to demonstrate our competency on everything on a
Oh
technical
yeah,
challenge.
the kettlebell training's intense.
It used to be. Yeah, I don't know if they still
Are
do it the way they did,
strong
but I
are you talking
remember.
about strong first or
Yeah, I
yeah.
was before Strong First, so I was RKC in
Oh,
2009
RKC. Yeah.
on a football field in San Diego at 100
Oh
degrees
gosh.
Fahrenheit weather, standing in the sun 8 hours a day, had to do a snatch test,
Yep.
had to do a technical challenge, had to do a graduation workout, had to pass everything to pass the cert.
It's hard too.
It was super hard, but
Yeah.
I thought, like, good for me, right?
Yeah.
Because I train a lot of athletes. It's the same as you, Erica, being a ex-varsity athlete. Like, you have a rite of passage. You've put yourself through a lot physically, mentally, emotionally. And those are things that you can, bring to your sessions with these young athletes. Are like, that's so cool that Erica did this. That was your actual real experience, and you know what it felt like and you can relate back to it. So I think that's important. And I think when kids are seeking good reconditioning and good rehab, the people and the parents finding good practitioners, they should be choosing and making sure, because those people are going to be spending a lot of time around their kids,
Yeah.
and you want them to be good mentors, educated, focused, calm, all of those good things, plus obviously competent.
And I think also making sure that the coach has that high standard of the performance numbers we were talking about as far as what we're working towards with strength. And we're not here to do a 25-pound goblet squat for a 14-year-old for 6 months straight. So we really want to progress that relative to body weight and just, asking questions about what people's numbers are, what their standards are. And yeah, just looking at who they've worked with. I mean, are they familiar with working with young female athletes who are detrained and they don't have a history of strength training? So they're new. Can they teach a
Yeah.
novice? Can they get that novice to buy into the gym and get her to actually look forward to the training? And I know you talked about earlier how it is hard to see girls go through rehab. It is long, it is depressing for many, but I do agree that the blessing in disguise from all of it, they can actually train hard and get a good adaptation, become really strong and confident and resilient because you see them so much. They're coming in like 2 to 3 times a week for several months. And I don't know if you see this with some of the athletes that you have go back, but I find that a lot of the girls that go back after the ACL return to sport, they're faster and stronger than their healthy teammates who have just been
Oh, yeah. Oh,
running
yeah.
all year, over soccered, over skilled, under strength
Yep.
trained, under plyometric trained. And
Yep.
it's just if I can help someone to go back better than they were prior to the injury happening, like, you've done your job. But
Well, I
have
think
you
you've
seen that
exceeded
with
it.
girls, like,
Oh, Erica,
compared
that's
to
why I'm
their teammate?
smiling. It's shocking.
Let's
People are
talk about our
shocked.
great athletes now.
Yeah, like it's really, really amazing. And I have two that I'm thinking of in particular that actually are both soccer players, and they went back and people were like, they did not expect this type of return. It wasn't
It's
just
amazing.
you were gone for a year. Well, one of them was about 14 months. And the cool story about her was she was actually in kind of like a group ACL program. But the physical therapist that was witnessing the program was like, this isn't quite enough for this girl. So even though it's at the facility he works out of, he called me because he's taken some of my plyometrics courses, and he called me and said, you know, can you see this athlete? And I said, yeah, for sure. And I assessed her. It hasn't even been a year. So I assessed her last May. And yeah, I was like, okay, this is going to be a project. This is going to be a project. So she trained with me 2 to 3 times a week from that point on, all the way till the middle of August, when we started to do her like return to sport, control to chaos sort of continuum.
Yeah.
And so I asked my son, I said, do you mind playing defense on her? So she can, because she's actually a lacrosse player, not soccer. She came from soccer originally. That was her first sport, and then lacrosse. And so he would come out and he'd play defense on her while she played. Oh, and so that way it could be a bit more of a predictable environment for her. And then over time, over a month period, we transitioned. She started to play defense on him, right? And he's a year younger, but he's a boy, so he's really challenging her, right, physically. And she could keep up. He was like, look at this. And then by the time she went back to her team, which was about I think the end of September, completely different person.
Yeah.
And we kept training, though. This is the thing. So a lot of times people stop training.
Yeah, don't
And
do that. Yeah.
she
Yeah.
keeps training. She's still training with me every week.
Yeah.
And when she can't see me following her own stuff, because she's doing some travel team stuff now. But yeah, she's coming in today, and she's trained with me on Wednesday already this week. So it'll be 2 sessions this week, right? And so
I love
the
it.
cool part too, Erica, is when she entered back into a group training setting with other girls her age, she is 30 to 40% stronger than all of them, and none of them had an ACL repair. And the other piece is the mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Like she just gets down to business. She doesn't really kind of shy away from stuff. She just goes and gets more weight, puts it on the bar if she thinks she can do more.
Mm-hmm.
She's highly autonomous with her own development now. And that's the other, I guess, secret when you're a strength and conditioning coach, I think, and you spend hours with people, I think obviously it would be outside of our scope to be doing psychological training, but you are coaching, and there's elements of coaching that are related to self-determination theory, which is psychology, and empowerment. So you are empowering these young girls session after session after session, and then it shows up. You see it, and you see not only a reconditioned athlete that's healed from their injury, you see someone that's now stronger and faster than everybody else in their age group and has a different level of confidence.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see that type of development. And, if you're working with the PT, they're seeing, people every half an hour. Sometimes they're seeing multiple people at once. You just aren't going to get necessarily that 360-degree level of service. So I know it's expensive sometimes to go private S&C, but the end of that is this lifelong difference, this knowledge of how to train, and this confidence that is broader. It's not single sport confidence either. Like, I'm a soccer player, therefore my confidence is in soccer. It's like they had this horrible traumatic event and soccer got taken away. And they had to build their confidence from other sources. And the research does prove and suggest that when we have multiple sources of confidence, we have more robust confidence.
I love it.
So there's lots of wins, in silver lining. So yeah.
There is.
That's
Yeah,
usually what I
there
tell
is.
kids when they first see me. I'm like, you know what? We're going to turn you to Megatron. Just give me
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah, and you can change someone in that amount of time. If they're seeing you
Absolutely.
3 times a week for 6 months, oh my gosh, just the amount of, like, amazing things that I've seen happen is just it's the light at the end of the tunnel for these girls because going through a major surgery like that it can really lead to depression, in the early stages.
Mhm.
I've heard a lot of stories, of girls I've worked with where, they wouldn't come out of their room and their parents were really concerned, and it's rough, and, if we can turn that around into something where you come back better, I mean, that's the best case scenario. You have to do it right and
You do.
work with the
Yeah.
right professional at each stage of the rehab and return process.
Our job really is to create that hope for kids. We don't make promises, but we show them that there is a path and a plan for them. And because I've coached kids for so long, I would say that when I talk to them about what a good coach is, they're not going to tell you it is the science because, again, they don't have the skills to evaluate our competency. But what they'll tell you is they do feel like you have a plan and it doesn't feel haphazard, like you had mentioned that earlier, where it was like, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And, all of a sudden they're allowed to run when they didn't do any run to walk. It just
Yeah.
seems like they're, taking shots in the dark. And, somebody that is more of an amateur at this type of work doesn't make necessarily much of a plan, for people. It's just sort of they come in, they get a treatment and some exercises and get sent. And I had a kid recently, Erica, where, I looked at the programming and I decided to actually show it to someone else that doesn't have maybe quite the background you and I do, just to get some opinion. Like, obviously no name shared, of complete protection of privacy. But I said, like, what do you think this program is? And they were like, no idea. And they said, why is it they're doing like 7 different single leg exercises? Right? Like just different variations of sort of the same thing. And that for me was a red flag. Was
Yeah.
kind of like, and then doing a depth jump before any other plyometrics, but to
Oh,
land
geez.
softly and calling it plyometrics. If I hear land softly one more time from a PT, I'm going to lose it.
It doesn't
How
work
about
anyway. It's not a good cue.
it's not a good cue because plyometrics are a serial skill.
Yeah.
Okay. They're not a discrete skill. So a serial skill is a skill that has no beginning and end, like running, right? You don't know when the run starts and it finishes. It's just running, right? It's a repetitive movement. Plyometrics should be coached and done the same way. So, by essence, if you have someone step off a box and land, that's not plyometrics. That is deceleration training.
Yeah.
That's actually an eccentric stress on the body. And the last thing I'm going to tell an athlete is to land softly. I'm going to be more concerned about where their eyes are, what angle their spine is at, and what angle their hips and knees are at. So that way they're not landing like a melting candle.
Gonna ask, so you would say the postures, positions are much more impactful than, if they stomp the ground but land in a good posture and position.
Posture and position is your bread and butter, but that's what a strength coach is going to be coaching right off the hop, right?
Yeah.
And
I see
so,
too many box
people,
jumps landed bad, like
well, because they don't know. So if somebody asks somebody to do something that they don't know how to coach, that's malpractice, right? It's malpractice. That is, well, what mal means bad or sick, right? It's bad practice. Yes, you could be sued for negligence for something like that. If you were there witnessing and willfully ignoring the bad technique and saying that you didn't know, well, then you should have never asked them to do that in the first place, right? So I mean, years ago, I worked in a clinical setting, sharing wide open gym floor space with physical therapists. And, a lot of them were okay. And then some of them were like really bad at coaching, like really bad. The kid doesn't know and the parents don't know because they don't have the training that you or I do to recognize malpractice, right?
It's happening a lot. I'm in a parents of ACL recovery Facebook group where, sports parents will share their young athlete's journey with rehab, and people post videos and they're like, "Oh, look at my daughter Sally. She's, so and so months post-op. Here's what she's doing with her PT, go grind." And you see the girl in the video doing 3 single leg hops in a row, and then she lands the last hop and she totally collapses forward. She's putting the weight on her toe. Her knees like pretty much straight during the landing. And everyone's cheering it on, like, "Yay, Sally." And I'm in there as a strength professional, like, "Oh shit, do I say something?" Like,
You should say something. You should
you
say
think I
something.
should?
And the thing,
I'm
yeah,
very tempted
absolutely.
to. I don't like.
I would say it like this. I would say, so when I took physical education as my undergrad, we learned, when somebody throws and steps with the same side foot, right? And they used to say, "Oh, you throw like a girl." At least this was back in my day. You throw like a girl. It's actually not a female style of throwing. It's actually what they call a physically immature style. So when you think of maturation as a process in growth and development and growth and motor development, as kids develop, they mature their style. So when you look at a 5-year-old run, it looks very different than a 10-year-old, than a 15-year-old. That's maturation. So what you could say is, if the hopping is wrong, is you could say that it's physically immature because she doesn't have the prerequisites to handle a triple hop, which
Yep.
requires a certain type of mechanics, right? And proficiency. You could basically sort of point that out, or try to, sort of educate. But I'm at a point in my career, Erica, where I care more about that kid than the grown-ups in the room.
Yeah.
So if someone gets butthurt because I call them out on their negligence and their malpractice, I do not care. Because I'll tell you right now, none of my coaches would ever do that. And they certainly wouldn't film it, send it to a parent and say it's good to be reposted. Right? So
Yeah.
we have a whole bunch of stuff going on that I think sometimes PTs think that just exposing an athlete to the stress of something is enough. And it's funny, I had a performance at UBC here and our good friends, and we basically have said this: I would rather an athlete that's had no coaching, they're a total novice, come and work with me, than the kid that's seen the strength and conditioning coach at their local gym, who's like really just a PT that says they train athletes, right? Do everything wrong, because for me to unscrew up bad motor patterns takes years.
Oh yeah.
It takes years. So to teach somebody good motor patterns takes me weeks. Sometimes I have kids right now, they're so good at their sport. And I know they're good at their sport because they'll pick up the motor skills that I'm teaching them in the weight room in a session, one session. Right? And in I've told parents, I could get your kid deadlifting their body weight in 20 minutes. They're looking at me like, "Are you serious?" Absolutely. Your kid is that athletic. And when I say athletic, when I say that term, it means that they are motor genius. They can move. And I can coach them, and they are so technically sound on everything. It's body awareness, right? So, when someone's posting a video of somebody doing something wrong, and it's wrong, it's not gray. It's a make or a miss. It's a miss. I would ask maybe what's good about this, right?
Yeah.
What's good about this technique? What are they doing well here? I
People
think
wouldn't have an answer, which is the saddest part.
that is, but I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it depends on who you're talking to in a post like that, right?
Yeah.
Social media is wild.
Mhm.
People really do post things with the pure intention to get it liked. Nobody posts something going, gee, I hope people don't like this. Right? So they literally, if they've posted it, it's just like the PTs that post, the force plate jumps with the person looking at their own feet. They didn't see it. They missed it. But because they missed it, that's a red flag.
We could do a whole separate podcast on plyometrics. Maybe we'll bring you back on because there's a lot more to unpack with plyos.
There is. It's just hard to just talk about it rather than, doing it, seeing it,
Yeah.
But I agree. It's a skilled movement. Okay. So plyometrics are extremely elegant. And the Russians, who everybody loves to talk about because they're like the grandfathers of sports science, would say plyometrics are simple, elegant, and correct. North Americans just have like this Pandora's box of drills. I might, in a plyometric session with an athlete, even my pros that aren't injured, I might pick 5 drills, and that's all we're doing for the workout. And we're hammering perfect technique, because if they execute the drill properly, like a speed hop, they run fast, right? It's just like doing a proper deep tier plyo. That athlete's going to own and be able to bounce out of a 180-degree pivot turn, which right now I know I'm speaking Greek to your listeners. But yeah, I mean, like I said, S&Cs were a lot more like sport coaches. We're very technical. And I love talking to sport coaches about sport technique.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, cool, talking about a jump shot in basketball or some type of ISO move. It's tactics and technique. I love it. And the strength and conditioning is so similar when we get to performance training, because we are doing performance training, right? We're not doing things to make someone medically cleared. This is high level performance and function, high levels of function. And what a housewife needs. No offense to housewives. I would love to be a housewife, to be honest. It would be great. I would, because then
I would, same.
I'd have like 8 children. I would. If I could have been a housewife, Erica, I would have had like 8 boys, and they would have been like the army in my house. It would have been awesome.
I agree.
That would have been a different life, right? But
making sourdough bread.
Making sourdough bread, picking the kids up from school, going to practice,
growing vegetables. That was my
world.
Growing vegetables.
And I had to rehab. Someone had to rehab my ACL. Well, the tasks that I would face in my day, right, of being like a taxi for 8 kids, are way different than demands a soccer player has to face playing in cleats on turf in a high friction environment. And no, it's not the turf that causes injuries.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the lack of the ability to handle the forces, or way, way too much fatigue on that poor body, right? And then the lack of ability to handle the forces. So, it's, we also have to consider, like parents can ask, how many people have you returned to sports successfully? What is your track record? My track record is perfect. Nobody has re-injured their ACL. And the reason why isn't because I'm amazing. It's because when there's a mess and too many cooks in the kitchen, I exit the situation.
Or if an athlete's not complying.
Exit the situation. Yeah. Well, sometimes they're not complying because of other psychosocial reasons. So I would try to get under that, to really figure it out. Because like a 14-year-old isn't going to go to the gym by themselves. Mom and dad have to go with them. They're not. They don't want to. It's isolating. It's not comfortable for them. So even if they sort of show maturity, it's still like it's ACL rehab. Like it's serious. So there should be an adult supervising most of what they're doing. And the most successful kids I've had have parents that are highly involved in a positive, supportive way, not in a tiger mom kind of way.
And it's important for girls who are returning to play to not just stop strength training all of a sudden. You have to keep it going, because those losses in strength come quicker than you think. Couple weeks, month, and it just keeps going down. So
Yeah, and if the
you have
schedules get busy, a good S&C will teach the kids how to microdose. There's no such thing as this like 48 hours rest between strength training and such
no,
hogwash, 3 sets of
yeah.
10, right? Like, give me a break. You can literally train every day with some level of strength, changing body parts, doing different types of stress, undulating. But that's what we do as strength coaches. We understand undulating load, we understand periodization, we understand recovery. There's just so much to know about development that we can't possibly, as a PT, can't possibly know all of this stuff plus all this rehab stuff. It's just way too much information. So it's better to have these two heads doing very specific jobs,
I
right?
love it.
Working together as a team.
I think that's a great place to end. And this was a really great
Cool.
discussion. I think a lot of
Good.
people will get a lot out of this. And I'll leave Carmen's links in the caption below so you guys can follow all of her amazing work. I'll leave the past episode that we did as well. So be sure to check that out because, surprise, the turf, the menstrual cycle, it's not causing these ACLs. So be sure to check out that episode. It was such a fun one. So, Carmen, thanks again for coming on,
Thanks,
and I'll
Erica.
see everyone next time.